August 21st, 2003, Flathead National Forest, Montana. The sun burned high over the Swan Range, but it offered no warmth. The sky, once clear, had turned a sickly ochre, streaked with gray. Ash fell like powder through the pines. Deep in the backcountry, 34-year-old Ben Hollis paused on a narrow ridge, lifted his canteen, and took a slow sip. The water tasted like copper and heat. His shirt clung to his back. Smoke curled through the underbrush. He'd been on foot since dawn, 2 days into a solo survey mission for Glacier West Mining. The job was simple: mark potential shale beds along a remote tributary called Eagle Fork, then return to the ranger station by the end of the 3rd day. But things had changed fast. Lightning strikes 3 nights earlier had ignited half a dozen spot fires across the forest. The news reached the ranger base late, and it hadn't reached Ben at all. Now, as he scanned the distant ridges, he saw what the weather radio had only hinted at: flame. A curtain of it. To the west, near Dawson Peak, the trees glowed red. Not a campfire, not a flare. A wall of fire, twisting up the slope, fueled by dry pine needles and late summer wind. Ben swore under his breath. He pulled out the map. The fastest way back was now gone. He traced a route eastward, toward Beargrass Hollow and the old game trails below Crane Ridge. It was rougher, steeper terrain, and it would add a full day, but it was his only shot. He packed quickly, minimal gear, a pack with iodine tablets, jerky, compass, headlamp, flare kit, water bottle, topographic map. He secured the straps, adjusted the weight, and moved. The light changed as he descended. Smoke drifted in sheets through the trees, painting everything in a hazy sepia. His GPS flickered and went dark. Batteries drained. He hadn't brought spares. He pressed on. The sun dipped below the ridge by 6:40 p.m. The air turned still. Too still. That was the first sign. Then came the second, the silence. Birdsong vanished. The squirrels were gone. Even the bugs had stilled. The only sound was the distant roar of fire and the crackle of dry limbs. Ben picked up his pace. By 8 p.m., visibility dropped sharply. The smoke was thicker, clinging to the forest floor like mist. Every breath stung. He tied a bandana around his face and kept walking. Then the wind changed. In a single sweep, the fire jumped a ridge and rolled east, toward him. He didn't see flames yet, but he saw the smoke shift. Trees groaned. Pine cones snapped and burst like popguns. The wind screamed through the trees in a way that made the hair on his arms stand up. Then he heard it, a low, distant rumble, like a freight train growing louder. Ben broke into a run. No trail, just instinct. Downhill, toward rock cover. He pushed through thorns, tripped on a root, caught himself. His pack slammed into a branch. He ducked, turned, and fell. The ground dropped out beneath him, a gully, maybe 10 feet deep. He landed hard. The world went white with pain. His head struck something, then nothing. Darkness swallowed everything. When Ben came to, it was dark. Not night dark, earth dark. He was lying on cold stone, cheek pressed to gravel, his left arm numb beneath him. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the pain hit. His ribs ached, his shoulder throbbed, his head pounded in slow, dull pulses. He tried to move, gasped. Smoke. He could smell it, faint now, but present, earthy, sour, clinging to his clothes. He coughed once, then bit down to stifle it. The sound echoed. He wasn't just in a ditch. He was inside something. His eyes adjusted slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket. The flashlight was still there. He clicked it on. The narrow beam flickered across a curved ceiling of rock and moss. The walls were rough, worn, scored by claw marks and time. A den. A bear den. His breath caught. He froze. The space was maybe 8 feet deep and 5 feet across. Barely enough room to turn over. He must have tumbled in through a natural chute. Above him, the ceiling sloped upward into blackness. Then he saw it. Not 5 feet from him, in the far corner, motionless but unmistakable, lay a grizzly. He stared, willing his body not to shake. The bear wasn't asleep. Its eyes were open, amber in the dark. It didn't move. Ben didn't know what to do. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. Every cell in his body screamed to flee, but he couldn't. His leg was twisted beneath him. He wasn't going anywhere. The bear blinked. Slowly. Then, incredibly, it turned its head away. It didn't rise, didn't roar, didn't charge. It simply exhaled, a slow, quiet breath like steam from a valve, and placed its head back on its paws. Ben sat for what felt like hours, paralyzed. The light dimmed in his hand as the battery drained. He turned it off, total darkness, and in the dark, only breath. His and the bear's. He didn't sleep, not really. He drifted in and out of a half-conscious state, shivering and staring into the black. Every sound became a question, every movement a fear. But the bear didn't move. Sometime before dawn, the outside world changed. The wind returned. He could hear the fire again, distant but moving. And with it, another sound, the panicked cries of animals. Elk, jays, rodents scrambling in the brush, but not near the den. The world just outside was chaos, but inside, nothing stirred. Ben pulled his jacket tighter. It was insane, unbelievable, but somehow, in that tiny cave, beside a wild grizzly, he was safer than he'd ever been. When daylight finally returned, it came slow, a gray filter pressing through cracks in the stone above. The world outside the den had changed. The air had an orange tint. Smoke still lingered, but the roaring had stopped. Ben opened his eyes and blinked at the light. His body was stiff. His mouth was dry. His left leg ached sharply when he moved. The bear hadn't moved. It was still lying in the corner of the den, its massive body curled slightly against the earth wall, head resting on its paws. Occasionally it shifted. A shoulder twitch, a breath, a low rumble in the chest, but never toward him. Ben tried not to look directly at it. He reached slowly into his pack and pulled out his water bottle. One sip, then another. He chewed a strip of jerky, dry and tasteless, but enough to keep the nausea away. Then he listened. No wind, no birds. The silence was heavier than before. Something about it made his skin crawl. By mid-morning, the bear lifted its head, ears twitching. It didn't look at him. It looked toward the cave entrance, or what little of it they can see from inside. The light was shifting again. Then, a thud. A loud one, like a tree falling nearby. Ben tensed. The bear didn't flinch. Another thud, closer. The groan. Not of wood, but of something else. Something deeper. Ben realized what it was. The slope above them was collapsing. The fire had loosened the soil. Roots were giving way. Trees were falling. And if the mouth of the den was buried, he reached for his bag. Too late. With a sudden crash, the cave's entrance blacked out, not from smoke, but from debris. earth, stone, broken limbs. The little light they'd had was gone. A storm of dust choked the space. Ben ducked, covering his mouth. The bear snorted once, deeply, and rose slightly onto its haunches, testing the scent in the air. Ben coughed into his arm. No, no, no. They were trapped. He aimed the flashlight toward the collapse. A wall of rock and dirt sealed the narrow chute he'd fallen through. No way up, no exit, just stone. And a bear. He lowered the light, and the bear looked at him. Their eyes met for the first time in full clarity. Not rage, not fear. Something else. Recognition. Ben didn't move. The bear huffed again. Then, without noise, it lowered itself back to the ground and closed its eyes. Hours passed. Ben's mind reeled. He was trapped in a collapsed bear den, wounded and alone, with a 500-pound wild animal lying 6 feet away. And yet, the longer it went on, the less afraid he became. The bear had had a dozen chances. It didn't act like a startled animal. It didn't charge or retreat. It was like it accepted him, or maybe tolerated him. He didn't know. He couldn't explain it, but there was an odd rhythm now. Breath, stillness, the occasional shift of pause. The den became something else, a pocket of survival, a space beyond understanding. By nightfall, Ben had lost all sense of time. He rationed what he had: 2 more strips of jerky, half a bottle of water, 1 extra flashlight battery, which he hadn't used yet. The first battery was nearly gone, so he kept the light off most of the time. Darkness came and went. He slept in bursts, hunched against his pack, legs stiff and burning. The bear slept too, or at least rested. Sometimes it breathed heavily. Once, it made a low, deep noise, like a grumble in its chest, but never moved closer. Ben found himself speaking aloud, partly to break the silence. "I don't know if you can understand me," he whispered once, "but I appreciate you not eating me." The bear didn't react, just exhaled slowly. By morning, Ben felt something new. Heat, not fire, but warmth creeping through the cracks above. The blockage at the den's mouth was drying, shifting. The structure was changing. He could smell sun again. He clicked the light back on and examined the rockfall. Some debris had loosened near the top of the slope. A narrow pocket had opened up, revealing a crack of light. Escape. Maybe. But his leg throbbed like fire. He couldn't walk, not well. Climbing up would be a risk. Still, it was something. He spent the morning preparing, tearing strips of his undershirt for padding, creating a makeshift brace with a snapped tent pole. When he was ready, he turned to the bear one last time. "You saved me," he said softly, "whether you meant to or not." The bear lifted its head, then slowly, very slowly, stood. Ben froze. This was the closest it had come to him. It was massive, tall as a man at the shoulder, scar across its muzzle, coarse fur matted from the smoke and cave dust. It walked once toward the cave mouth, sniffed the air, then turned and padded past Ben without a sound. It didn't attack, didn't growl, just left. There was a second passage. Ben hadn't seen it before. A narrow gap near the rear wall, mostly hidden behind old roots and stone. The bear slipped through it and vanished. Gone. And with it, the fear. Ben dragged himself toward the front. It took an hour. Every foot gained was paid in sweat and pain. He clawed at stone, wedged the flashlight in his mouth, groaned with his knee buckled beneath him. The opening was small, barely wide enough for a grown man with a pack, but he made it. When he emerged, the light blinded him. Trees were scorched, but standing. Smoke hung in the distance like a veil, but the worst of the fire had passed. Animals had begun to return. Jays chattered in the trees. A woodpecker tapped in the distance. And overhead, silence. He was alive. Ben staggered to a flat rock and sat. His leg screamed beneath him, and his ribs pulsed in waves of pain, but the sky was open above. Blue, real blue, cutting through the fading veil of smoke. He was out. The ridge to the east was blackened, but still passable. If he could follow it for 2 miles, he might reach the fire road. There, he could hope to flag a ranger patrol, assuming they hadn't already evacuated the zone. He didn't wait. Using a broken limb as a crutch, he moved. Step. Pause. Breathe. He drank the last of his water. Ate the last of the jerky. The sun burned overhead, but it was different now. Not threatening. Liberating. The weight of the cave had lifted. But as he reached the first high bluff and looked back over the valley, something in him stirred. He turned toward the slope, toward the den, and there, just at the tree line, a shadow moved, a shape. The bear. It stood still, half hidden among the blackened pines, watching. Ben didn't wave, didn't speak. He just looked, and after a long moment, the bear turned and disappeared into the trees. Not running, not afraid, just done. 3 days later, Flathead Ranger Station. Observation report. The fire had been contained by late August. Lightning had caused at least 9 spot burns. 2 developed into larger wildland fires. Most affected zones were unpopulated. One incident report, however, drew attention. A lone geologist, Benjamin Hollis, had been located walking along Service Trail 4B, barefoot, limping, with a hand-carved crutch and soot-stained clothes. He was dehydrated, injured, and exhausted, but lucid. He gave a full verbal account. His injuries matched his timeline. Paramedics verified moderate burns on his left calf, 2 cracked ribs, and a hairline fracture in his tibia. But one detail puzzled the ranger team. His mention of the bear. Large female grizzly, he said. Scar above her left eye. Older. She didn't attack. She shared the den. I think she saved my life. Wildlife authorities searched the area 3 days later. They located the den. Burned at the mouth. Tracks around the rear exit. Bear hair near the bedding. No sign of the animal itself. No signs of aggression. No signs of struggle. Just one man's survival. And one bear's choice. It was nearly a year before Ben Hollis returned to Montana. His limp was still noticeable. His left knee ached when it rained. But he came back, not for work, not for another survey, but for something quieter. He drove the back roads alone, carrying a small bag and a map he'd marked by hand. When he reached the ranger station, the new warden, Trace Kelly, greeted him. "You're the guy from the fire," Trace said. Ben nodded. "That's me." "They said you saw a bear." Ben smiled. "No, I lived beside one." They hiked out together. Ben led the way. It took the better part of a day, but they found the den again. The mouth had collapsed further, but the outline was still there. Dark earth, half-scorched roots, the faint scent of pine and thyme. Ben stood there in silence, then knelt. From his bag, he pulled out a small wooden plaque, carved by hand. It bore no name, no year, no location, just an image. A bear curled in repose, and below it, a single word, sanctuary. He wedged it gently beneath a stone at the mouth of the den, brushed the earth from his knees, and stood. Trace said nothing. They hiked back in silence. Years later, Ben left fieldwork after that. Took a position teaching geology at a community college near Missoula. His lectures were precise, soft-spoken, and sometimes ended with stories, usually about rivers, rock layers, or storms. But once a year, usually in August, he'd disappear for a weekend. He never said where, only that he was going up high. Those who knew him best noticed the change in him. A stillness, a kind of reverence he carried after that fire. Not fear. Not trauma. Something older. Gratitude. He never stopped telling people about that bear. Not for attention, not to prove anything, but because he believed it mattered. In wilderness survival, there are manuals, there are rules, there are probabilities. But sometimes there's something else, something that doesn't fit in charts or threat assessments. Something wordless. That day in the den, Ben Hollis learned what it meant to survive. But more than that, he learned that sometimes the wild chooses mercy, that not everything untamed is dangerous, that sometimes even the grizzly shelters. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and breathe just a little deeper, consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment, share the story, because the wilderness still holds secrets, and some are worth remembering. Thank you for listening to Grizzly Shelter.